For Triumph is a turn-based tactics strategy game set in a comedic fantasy world that can succinctly be described as XCOM of Might and Magic, since it does a great job at taking features from those two series and smashing them together with a destructible environment into something that is not just appealing to fans of those series, but is a standalone product that can be a great entry point into both those genres for some who have never experienced either. During the campaign, you'll take over a group of oddball hero characters, adventuring through a fairly by-the-numbers story but which features stupendously funny dialogue, which you can see in my For Triumph livestream right there in the corner, where I also do voices. I played the game when it first went into early access back in 2018, and a lot of things changed for the much better in the meanwhile, from the graphics to gameplay mechanics, as you can see in this side by side of what a random encounter looked like 2 years ago and what it looks like now. But thankfully the funny writing stayed the same. So there are a few defining gameplay characteristics I have to go through when talking about For Triumph. The XCOM influences, the Heroes of Might and Magic influences, and the game's physics mechanics. The XCOM influence is heavy when it comes to For Triumph's turn-based tactical combat. It has action points and each character class gains access to further abilities as they advance in experience. It should be noted, however, that your characters in For Triumph are much more akin to RPG heroes, meaning that you have way more abilities to choose from while leveling up. While doing this, you can even choose between gaining new abilities and improving already existing ones, and also you get to choose from different abilities at each level, so you'll get to customize your classes to your playstyle, or likewise can try out different builds for the same class. They also have an Overwatch ability, but here it has a bit of a twist. Overwatch applies to ranged units as you might imagine, allowing them to shoot at enemies that move within their range during the enemy's turns. But in For Triumph, not all units are ranged. So the melee classes will instead become braced, basically increasing their defense for the upcoming enemy turn. One great piece of design that For Triumph brings to the genre table is that there is a separate brace/Overwatch end turn button. Basically, instead of simply clicking the end of turn button, you can hit this button, and if any of your party members have enough action points to go into Overwatch, they will, and then the turn will be ended. This feature simply has to become a must-have in all turn-based tactics games that have Overwatch-like mechanics. Combat is also where we experience the game's perhaps most important and particular gameplay feature, its interactive environment. In For Triumph, you can physically interact and modify your tactical environment, either by moving, kicking, pulling, pushing, or blowing obstacles up. This isn't limited to simply the destruction of cover, because when used correctly, you can use an enemy's cover to cause them damage. They can also do the same to you though. You generally do this by kicking. Kicking is by far my favorite physics related ability. It's just incredibly satisfying to kick motherfuckers into things and or things into motherfuckers. This not only causes damage as a result of the thing that they were taking cover behind hitting them in their entire material existence, but will also stun them for the following turn. The melee classes have access to an upgraded kick, which will make it deal direct damage when applied to an enemy. For best results, kick an enemy into an obstacle behind which another enemy is covering. It's the funniest thing you can do, also the most efficient. One super important aspect of combat that I don't think gets covered enough is the fact that even though combat takes place on a square grid, you can use all of your physics related abilities diagonally as well. The Heroes of Might and Magic influence was only touched upon during the early access version I played. Only the overall map was available, but now you have lots of hotspots around the map besides monsters and items, but more importantly you have a city and a city screen which you can improve with buildings that will upgrade your party's overall fighting capacities. Developing your city will allow you to improve your party's armor, health, be able to add another member to your party, carry more artifacts. It's really cool. This base building aspect of the game isn't as complex or involved as it is in the Hero series. There are only 3 resources in For Triumph, but it's also not just tacked on. In fact, you'll get quite annoyed with the aggressivity of your enemies on the map and how they're going to storm your city constantly, making you have to backtrack to reconquer it. Of course, also thanks to the upgrades, you will have a special garrison protecting your city, made up of character classes that are not available to play with, such as champion or priest. Not as strong as your heroes, but when the city is upgraded enough, you will be able to repel some enemy parties. Upgrading your town also creates the possibility of creating a second party, but you'll also need to level them in order for them to pose a threat to a fairly strong enemy. And that seems to be an issue, because despite the game telling you at the beginning of each week that the monsters have gotten stronger, they don't seem to respawn on the map to allow you to level up a secondary party. Oh, also, your city is where you'll be able to resurrect party members you lost during missions, as long as at least one member still survives. This was one feature that was completely absent from the game 2 years ago. Obviously, not everything is rainbows and unicorns about the game. One bad piece of design I found is campaign related and shows up during protection missions. The goddamn peasants you're supposed to be protecting keep advancing into the enemy line. And it's not like they do this to attack. Oh, no. They just go near them, so they're easier to kill, I guess. So that's frustrating, but nowhere near a deal breaker. I was glad to see that the cartoony aesthetic didn't turn off people from trying and playing for Triumph. If you watch my original video, I expressed some concerns related to this, but I'm glad those proved to be unfounded, because the combat is anything but cartoonish or simplistic. Development time passing allowed for everything to be considerably better balanced. Fights aren't as challenging as they were 2 years ago, but some of them will definitely have you reloading a previous save. Also, more time allowed for some interesting combos between the various class abilities to be developed. For instance, the wizard has a spell called Electrocute. This spell doesn't do damage on a success, instead it places a debuff on the target that damages the recipient for every square they move afterwards. If they stay still, you wasted your action points and spell. But if you then use your Savage's Frighten ability, which makes enemies around them run as far as they can, then the enemy with Electrocute on them will get a lot more damage than you'd normally be able of dishing out with just 1 or 2 ranged abilities. For Triumph has a bunch of really cool design decisions that simply have to become standard in turn-based tactics games. The physical interactions with the environment is by far the meatiest of them. It can be done now, computers have the processing power, we just need developers to put in the arguable large amounts of time and effort into getting some of this stuff into their games. It not only increases the amount of things that can be done in the game for the player, but it also enhances level and ability design decisions as well as replayability. Think about using all physics abilities runs, or no physics abilities runs, or only some. It's something that should be seriously considered when working on one of these going forward. The earlier mentioned Overwatch end of turn button should also be a must-have in all turn-based games, as well as being able to move the camera using WASD. This should also become more widespread than it already is. The game comes with a local co-op option, so basically a hot seat feature in the vein of the older Heroes games. Wonderful. And there's also a skirmish feature in which you can play with any of the other races present in the game: humans, undead, goblins or trolls. At the moment there is only a human campaign, but in time, who knows, they might add campaigns for the others as well. So for Triumph in full release form, definitely gets my nonsense seal of approval. Hey there dear watcher who's still watching, thank you very much for sticking around. I've recently started a Patreon page, so if you want to and can throw a couple of bucks my way to help me get more games, go on there and check out the tiers and rewards. If you can't do that but still want to help, please consider subscribing, turning on the notification bell, and of course share the video far and wide, because that's the best way to make sure the channel grows. I've been Stephen Nonsense, thank you very much for watching, see you next time and have a great rest of the day.